Happy Monday, everybody. Mr. S here, and that means it's time for a new week and our news story. But before I begin, I hope everyone enjoyed today's beautiful rain that we had, the sound of the rain on the rooftop, on the windows, on the floor, and the smell of fresh air. I love the rain. And I also love to read stories. So let's begin, shall we? You bet. Our next story is, for this week, Flat Stanley, Stanley Flat Again by Jeff Brown. Illustrations by Mackie Pamantwin. Now, a little fun fact, this is the first chapter book that my daughter received when she was in first grade. Long time ago. Yeah. And she wanted me to share this with all of you. Now, since it is a chapter book, there aren't many pictures, which you might think, oh man, but you know what? The best pictures you can make are right here in your mind. Use your imagination. That's right. Your imagination can make wonderful pictures, even better than what you see illustrated here, which I will show you when we get to it. So, let me give you a little background to this particular story. If you've never read the first one, definitely check it out. It'll give you a little background as to how Stanley got flat in the first place. In this story, Stanley Lambchop thought he was back to being a normal, round kid for good, until one morning when, out of nowhere, he seems to have gone flat again. While being half an inch thick has its interesting points, Stanley can't help wondering why he can't be just like everybody else, like you and me. But when disaster strikes downtown and one of Stanley's classmates is trapped, Stanley discovers that being different can definitely come in handy. After all, sometimes it takes a flat hero to save the day. Ready to begin? I am. Let's start. Chapter 1. A Morning Surprise. Mrs. Lambchop was making breakfast. Mr. Lambchop at the kitchen table helped by reading bits from the morning paper. "Here's an odd one, Harriet," he said. "Oh, there's a chicken in Sweden that rides a bike." Oh, so do I, George," said Mrs. Lambchop, not really listening. Can you see why she wasn't really listening? Well, listen to this. Merker building emptied, to be collapsed next week. Imagine, 8 floors. Oh, yes, poor thing, Mrs. Lambchop set out plates. Boys, breakfast is ready. Her glance fell upon a row of photographs on the wall above the sink. There was a smiling Stanley, only half an inch thick, his big bulletin board having fallen from the bedroom wall to rest upon him overnight. Next came reminders of the many family adventures that had come after Stanley's younger brother Arthur had cleverly blown him round again with a bicycle pump. Smart. There were the brothers with Prince Horace, the young genie who had granted wishes for them all after being accidentally summoned by Stanley from a lamp. There was the entire family with Santa Claus and his daughter, Sarah, taken during a Christmas visit to the North Pole. There was another family portrait again in Washington, D.C., in the office of the President of the United States, who had asked them to undertake a secret mission into outer space. The last picture showed Arthur standing beside a balloon on which Mrs. Lambchop had painted a picture of Stanley's face. The balloon, its string in fact held by Stanley, since he was invisible at the time. "Boys," she called again, "breakfast!" In their bedroom, Stanley and Arthur had finished dressing. While Stanley filled his backpack, Arthur bounced his tennis ball. "Let's go," he said. "Here, catch." Stanley had just reached for a book on the shelf by his bed. The ball struck his back as he turned, and he banged his shoulder on a corner of the shelf. "Ouch!" "Oh, sorry," Arthur said, "but let's go, okay? You know how long—" "Stanley? Why are you shouting?" Stanley adjusted his pack. "Come on, I'm so hungry." Oh boy. Arthur, do you see? Yeah, I do, actually. Arthur swallowed hard. You know you're flat. The brothers stared at each other. The pump? Stanley said. It might work again. What do you think? Let's find out. Arthur fetched the bicycle pump from their toy chest, and Stanley lay on his bed with the hose end in his mouth. Arthur gave a long, steady pump. Stanley made a face. Oh, that hurts! Arthur pumped again, and Stanley snatched the hose from his mouth. Ow! That really hurts! It wasn't like that before. Oh, we better stop. You know what? Arthur said. We can't just hide in here forever, you know. Mrs. Lambchop's call came again. Boys, come down. Oh man, do me a favor, Stanley said. You tell them. Arthur, you'll sort of get them ready, okay? Okay, said Arthur, and went to tell. Arthur stood in the kitchen doorway. Hey, guess what? He said. Hay is for horses, dear, said Mrs. Lambchop. Good morning. Breakfast is ready. Good morning, Arthur, Mr. Lambchop said from behind his newspaper. Where's Stanley? Oh, yeah, Stanley. Guess what? Arthur said again. Mrs. Lambchop sighed. Oh, all right. I can guess. Tell, right. Well, Stanley's, Stanley's flat again, said Arthur. Mr. Lambchop put down his paper. Mrs. Lambchop closed her eyes. Flat again? Is that what you said? Yeah, said Arthur. It's true. Stanley stood now beside Arthur in the doorway. Just look. Yep, definitely flat. Good grief, said Mr. Lambchop. I can't believe that bulletin board. It didn't fall on me this time, Stanley said. I just got flat. Arthur tried to pump me up like before, but it hurt too much. Oh, Stanley, Mrs. Lambchop ran to kiss him. How do you feel now? Well, fine, actually, Stanley said. Just surprised. Can I go to school? Mrs. Lambchop thought for a moment. Oh, very well. Your breakfast. After school, we'll hear what Dr. Dan has to say. Chapter 2, Dr. Dan. Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop, and the boys, said Dr. Dan as they entered his office. How nice to... Good heavens, Stanley! Mr. Lambchop, you really must do something about that bulletin board. It is still firmly in place, Dr. Dan, Mrs. Lambchop said. We are at a loss to account for this attack of flatness. Dr. Dan thought for a moment. And while he's thinking, there's Dr. Dan, new character in the story. Well, is there perhaps a family history of flatness? No, Mr. Lambchop said. We'd remember that. Well, we got dressed for school, Stanley explained. We didn't even have breakfast, and all of a sudden I got flat. Dr. Dan frowned. Nothing happened? Nothing at all? Well, let's see. Well, yeah, Arthur hit me with a tennis ball, Stanley said, and then I banged my shoulder on... Aha! Jumping up, Dr. Dan took a large book from the case behind his desk and began turning the pages. This is Dr. Franz Gemeister's excellent, difficult, and peculiar cases. Just let me find... here it is! Flatness, page 217. He read aloud. Sudden flatness, extremely rare. Minimal documentation. Yes. Here's the reports. Here it is. Dates back to the 5th century. There he is reading. Let's see. It says here, during battle, Mongo the Fierce, an aide to Attila the Hun, was struck twice, simultaneously, from behind, and at once became no thicker than his shield. He became known as Mongo the Plate, and lived to an old age without regaining his original girth. There he is. Mongo the Plate, formerly known as Mongo the Fierce. Dr. Dan closed the book. As I suspected, the OPB. Beg pardon? Said Miss Lambchop. The OPB, osteal balance point, Dr. Dan explained. A little-known anatomical feature. The human body, as you know, is a complex miracle, its skeleton a delicate framework of supports and balances. The osteal balance point may occur almost anywhere in the upper torso. It is vulnerable only to the application of simultaneous pressures at 2 points, which vary depending on the age and particular design, let us say, of the individual involved. In my opinion, the pressures created by the tennis ball and the shelf corner affected Stanley, OPB, thereby turning him flat. For a moment, everyone was silent. Well, the first time Stanley went flat, you were greatly puzzled by his condition, Mr. Lambsop said at last. Now you seem remarkably well informed. Well, I read up on it, said Dr. Dan. Mrs. Lambchop sighed. Well, perhaps we should seek a second opinion. Who is the world's leading authority on the OPB? That would be me, said Dr. Dan. Oh, I see. Well, we've taken enough of your time, Dr. Dan. Thank you. Mr. Lambchop rose, motioning to the family to follow. At the door, Mrs. Lambchop turned. Perhaps if we found the OPB, we could make Stanley... No, said Dr. Dan. It would be dangerous to put the lad through such a skeletal strain again. And finding the OPB... Oh, not very likely, I'm afraid. Arthur had an idea. I know. If we all got sticks and hit Stanley all over the same time and kept doing it, then that will do, Arthur, Mr. Lambchop said, and led his family out. And those are the first 2 chapters of Flat Stanley, Flat Again by Jeff Brown. Good story. I'll continue tomorrow. Be ready. And as always, be good humans, take care of one another, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.